The first time she said the word, the whole ward went silent, nurses paused mid-step, the heart monitor of the next bed ticked like a metronome, and my coffee went cold in my hand. "Husband," she whispered to me, her fingers trembling inside mine as if they were learning what safety felt like for the first time. I should have corrected her. Instead, I tightened my grip. Outside, rain scratched at the hospital windows and I understood, with a clarity that frightened me, that one small word could rearrange 2 entire lives. The night began with the kind of rain that makes a city remember its secrets. Down on Jail Road, Lahore glistened with reflected headlights, puddles catching portraits of strangers who did not know they were being painted by water. I had been awake for 30 hours, walking laps between the oncology ward and the vending machine like a man pacing a shoreline while the tide mulled over whether to spare him. My mother was the tide. "Stable," the doctor said, a word that sounds gentle and feels like a cliff. At 2:17 a.m., the elevator doors opened with a sigh and she stepped out. She was carrying nothing but a soaked shawl and a phone with a cracked screen that blinked like a dying lighthouse. Her hair clung to her temples, her eyes were the color of the sky right before it decides whether to storm or break. She stood there in the cold fluorescence, looking not lost but untethered, as if some invisible thread had snapped. "Are you all right?" The question felt inadequate, but it's what I had. She startled, then nodded, and then shook her head, the kind of choreography people do when language can't keep up. "I'm looking for a place," she said, voice gravelly with rain and swallowed tears. "Just a place where no one will think to look for me." This is the part where stories usually offer backstory like a glass of water. But all I had in the cup were guesses. I noticed the thin, red line pressed into the skin of her finger where a ring should have been, or had been, or was meant to be. I noticed the bruise blooming on the soft half-moon of her elbow. I noticed that she kept checking the corner where the corridor met the stairwell, the way a rabbit checks a field before it crosses. "Sit," I said, because I had a chair and she had nowhere to put her fear down. She sat. I offered the paper cup of coffee. She took it with both hands, as if it might try to escape. She tilted it to her mouth and winced at the bitterness but drank anyway. "I'm Aram," I added, because names are a kind of bridge. She swiped rain from her cheeks with the heel of her palm. "Maya," she said. The name fit her like a borrowed sweater, worn in, still warm from whatever shoulders had used it last. "Do you need to call someone?" I asked. She flinched so hard the coffee rippled. "If I call, he'll hear it ring." There it was, the shape of her fear. A person, not a place. A he who listened for ringing. The hospital became a map of exits in my mind, of cameras. Borrowed my shoulder and called it shelter. We must have looked, to any passerby, like a scene a city might shrug off and then remember later when it needed to believe in people. A nurse walked by, smiled at the way Maya's fingers kept, even in sleep, finding the hem of my sleeve. She draped a blanket over us without asking and disappeared the way kindness does when it wants to be anonymous. At 4:33 a.m., my phone buzzed. A message from my sister, Noor, "Go home, Aram. Ma is asleep. You'll be useless at dawn if you don't rest." I typed, "I'm with someone who needs not being alone," and left it unsent. The blue light on my screen cast the word husband-shaped shadows against the wall long before I understood what they meant. By the time the first pale stripe of morning slid under the blinds, the hospital had begun its daily opera, the clatter of breakfast trolleys, the squeak of polished floors, the murmurs of visiting hours rehearsing themselves. I felt Maya stir, the small, searching stretch of a person checking whether they are still held. I didn't move. She opened her eyes, dazed, and for a tight, holy second she looked like someone who had woken up not in a hospital waiting room but in a life where the worst thing was the unmade bed. Her gaze landed on my face, then on our joined hands, then on the door beyond which her past likely paced. Her throat worked around a word. When it arrived, it did not feel like a mistake. It felt like a plan. "Husband," she said. "Please." It is astonishing how fast a single word can rearrange the furniture in a room. The nurse with the breakfast tray glanced over, eyebrows arching into a small sunrise. The sleepy guard straightened. The world tilted, and I decided not to correct it. If language could be used as a weapon, then surely it could be used as a shield. Right here, I answered, and eased her upright, my arms still around her shoulders. What do you need? Maya's eyes were glass clear, the way eyes get when the body chooses survival as its primary language. He will come here, she said, almost conversationally, as if predicting a change in weather. He has friends at every door. If I walk out alone, I'll be walked back. But nobody touches a wife in public, not when they can't predict the witnesses she comes with. The logic was appalling and flawless. I nodded, feeling the strangeness of having two lives balanced in my chest, the one where I was just a son and the one where I had woken a husband. Then we won't walk out alone, I said. For the next hour, we rehearsed a marriage. It was not a game. It was a choreography. Names, we kept our own. Dates, we invented them. We picked a restaurant where we had our first fight, the sort of fight reserved for couples who know they will forgive each other, a plant we had killed together, a neighbor's cat that tolerated me and adored her. We stitched a story that could not easily be cut apart in the middle of a lobby. Nor arrived just after 7, designed for morning as only some people are. She took in the picture, my arm around Maya, our eyes both fierce and afraid, and adapted without forcing me to explain. Nor is a teacher, she knows how to enter classrooms mid-lesson without derailing the day. Bye, she said lightly, you'd better introduce me to my Bobby before I embarrass myself by calling her, hey you. Later, I murmured, grateful becoming a visible thing between us. Right now, we need a walk to the car that looks like a wedding procession. Nora's gaze flicked to the corridor, then to the doors beyond which the city waited with its own teeth. Done, she said. I'll talk to Ollie in security. He owes me for the time I covered his sister's tuition. She was gone before we could thank her. Maya breathed, long and slow, like she was learning a new instrument and that instrument was her own body. I don't mean to trap you in this, she said. You didn't, I replied. You handed me a chance to be useful. The first test came in the corridor. 3 men in well-cut clothes pretended to read a chart on the wall. Their reflection in the glass told the truth, eyes flicking toward us, figures tensing. One of them stepped forward, smile shaped like a blade. Madam, he said to Maya, in the tone you use on someone whose will you believe is negotiable. Sir, he added to me, a notch warmer, the way the world often does, respecting men as default, women as permissions. Maya's hand found my elbow. I felt her fingers settle the way a bird chooses a branch. Good morning, she said, and leaned her head against my shoulder in the smallest, most consequential movement I have ever witnessed. My husband and I are just leaving. The man's smile trembled. There are codes in this city, some written, some carved into the bones of the ones who never agreed to them. One of the more ancient codes is that you do not make a scene with a wife in a hospital at dawn. Not because of decency, because of spectacle. Because people will watch. Of course, the man said, pride learning how to walk in shoes it didn't choose. Of course, he repeated, as if language could delay reality. We're only here to ensure your safety. You have, Maya said. Thank you. Nor appeared then with a guard and a wheelchair. Doctor's orders, she chirped, conspiratorial and wide awake. No one argues with wheelchairs. She winked at Maya, who allowed herself to be lowered into it like a queen rehearsing humility. I tucked the blanket around her knees, she caught my wrist for half a second longer than necessity. We rolled past the men, Nor narrating our morning as if it were an episode of a show the entire corridor already loved. The nurse at the station gave us a thumbs up, somebody whistled a tune that did not know it was an anthem. The lobby was bright and glass-walled. Outside, the rain had given up its tantrum and settled into a drizzle that made the city's edges soft. Through the doors, I saw a black car idling, its windows tinted, the kind of car that believes itself to be its own law. My jaw tightened. Nor squeezed my shoulder. "Keep moving," she whispered. "Let the theater finish the act." We crossed the threshold. The cool damp air of morning rushed up, full of diesel and gardenia and the whir of 1,000 beginnings. A man I recognized from news photos leaned against the car, the kind of political fixer whose name never makes it into print but whose phone number lives in the phones of people with priorities. His smile was an arrangement of teeth without hunger. "Maya," he said, using her name like a handle. "You gave us a scare." Maya looked at him the way a window looks at rain, present, not penetrated. "You won't be needing me," she said. "I've married." "Married?" He let the word hang there long enough for the morning to sniff it and decide it was plausible. "To whom?" "To me," I said. My voice didn't shake, and that surprised me. "We registered at Kinnaird Town Hall last week. It was private. We'll have a reception when my mother is well." It was the first lie that felt like truth. Because whether or not a ceremony had occurred, something binding had happened, a tenderness signed in a waiting room at an hour when people tell the truth without intending to. The fixer's eyes assessed me with the efficiency of a scanner. He noted my shoes, clean but tired, my watch, scratched but loved, the way Noor stood at my back like a witness. He tilted his head. "Congratulations," he said. "Truly. But there are arrangements. Families. Investments. You understand. Her father is a man of consequence. And so is everyone who chooses kindness when it would be cheaper to look away," Noor said before I could. "If you try to force her into your car, you will build us a story. We will tell it. We are very good at telling stories." The fixer's lip curled and then smoothed itself, an actor resenting a line and then saying it anyway. "No force," he sighed, as if he were sparing us rather than being spared by the presence of dozens of eyes and a security camera that would later, if required, develop a conscience. We walked to my old Suzuki, which looked suddenly like a temple. I opened the passenger door. Maya stood up from the wheelchair on legs that remembered their job. She met my eyes. For a second, the world shrank to a single hallway of possibility. Then she smiled, a tiny, irreverent thing that could have powered the whole city if we had known how to wire it. "Thank you," she said, voice low enough that it belonged only to us. "For carrying a word heavy enough to hide in." "Keep it," I said. "We can always return it if it stops fitting." We drove. The city arranged itself around us. Motorbikes, school vans, the smell of paratha and wet dust, people using stolen moments to live like they chose their lives. I took the canal road, then the turn that led to my apartment block where the guard knew my name and wouldn't sell it. On the third scan came back with the kind of news that makes a hospital room briefly feel like a festival. Stable had become improving. The doctor smiled with his whole face. "Go home," he said. "Sleep in your own bed." I did, for the first time in weeks, and because it was still right, Maya stayed in mine and I stayed on the couch and neither of us were poor for it. One dawn, the city half asleep and the birds loud in the mango trees behind the flats, Maya stood in my kitchen in my hoodie, pouring water into the kettle as if this, and not fear, had been the point all along. She turned to me. "I don't want to use a word as a shield anymore," she said. "I want to say it because it is true." "Then say it," I told her, voice so careful it could have been carrying glass. She crossed the small space between us and took my face in her hands like it was something she had won and intended to cherish. "Husband," she said. Then, laughing into my mouth when I kissed her, "but by choice, Aram. Not because the world made it safer. Because we are the people we are inside each other's rooms." We married with a small ceremony in Noor's courtyard, paper garlands, lentil dishes, my mother in a pale shawl smiling as if the sun had personally apologized to her. There were no fireworks, no journalists, no deals. Our vows were short and undone at the edges because we wrote them the night before and they smelled like cardamom and ink. When the registrar asked us if we understood what we were signing, Maya said yes in the tone of someone who has tried to live without understanding and refused to do it again. We did not become perfect. The world did not become kind because of our decision. Love didn't transform our lives into a string of convenient miracles. But it turned the volume down on fear and turned it up on gratitude. When her father came for tea, he watched her laugh and realized the sound had not been lost to the world, merely mislaid. When the man who once believed he owned her walked past us at a charity gala and pretended not to recognize her, we pretended not to recognize who we had been when he thought that was possible. Months later, on a morning brighter than any story deserves, I found the shattered remains of a teacup in a box of donations. I held them up with the care old things demand. "You want to throw this away?" I asked. Maya took one piece, ran her thumb along the edge. "No," she said, a slow smile gathering. "I want to mend it with gold. Kintsugi, the art that says the broken parts are where the light comes in." We sat on the floor with lacquer and dusted gold and patience, piecing a small universe back together. When we finished, the cup looked like a map of the paths people take back to themselves. Sometimes, in bed at night, Maya still reaches for my sleeve hem. I pretend not to notice and move closer so she can find it. And every so often, she wakes at dawn and says, "Husband," with the blissful entitlement of someone who chose the word and keeps. The hallway smelled of old paint and ambition. I put a kettle on, because that is how we tell panic where to sit. Maya walked the small space like a cartographer, mapping exits, corners, the way the curtain fell across the balcony door as if trying to give the sky some privacy. "I'll only stay until I figure out my next step," she said. "I don't want to become your obligation." I leaned against the counter and looked at her, really looked for the first time without the urgency of corridors and men pretending to read charts. She was not fragile. She was the kind of strong that looks quiet until it's asked to roar. "You are not an obligation," I said. "You are a person in a moment. We all take turns needing." Her shoulders sagged, the particular collapse of someone who has just been given permission to be human. She accepted the tea. We sat. We made a list. Calls to a friend who worked at a shelter for women that was a shelter not just in name. A message to a lawyer nor trusted. A plan to meet her father in a public place with a journalist at the next table. We built a strategy from scratch and it held. Days became a week, then two. In that time, we did ordinary things with unordinary attention. We bought tomatoes from the man who spoke to them as he weighed them, as if they were shy. We argued softly about whether chai should be sweet enough to remember its own sugar. We learned each other's weather, how I went quiet when I'd spent too long at the hospital, how she knocked twice on the bathroom door not to ask for me but to ask me to ask for myself. At night, she slept in my bed while I took the couch. It felt correct, like an equation that balanced. The distance made the tenderness not a hunger but a promise. We met her father in a park at noon, where nothing illicit can live. He was a man who had spent his love like a currency that later he pretended he had never held. His first words were orders. His second were prayers disguised as questions. He talked about respect, neighbors, money, while his eyes begged her to be easier than she was. Maya spoke with a steadiness that came from the person she had been building inside my small apartment, a person who believed her own account of herself. "Appa," she said, the word both a plea and a boundary, respect is not silence. It is choosing not to make me small. He cried, not the kind of crying that asks to be forgiven, but the kind that finally confesses. He did not become a different man in one afternoon. But he became a man who would no longer trade his daughter for a tidy reputation. Her former fiancé sent messages, then a packet, then a man who said, mistakes were made. We sent back a single sheet of paper that said, in the crisp grammar of the law, that if he came within a certain distance of Maya or my family, his money would learn what law felt like when it had a spine. He did not come close enough for us to find out which one of us was bluffing. In the third week, my mother's choosing it. I answer every time. We both know that the word began as a shelter built in a storm, but what matters is that we stayed to repaint it when the sun returned. If you've stayed with us until now, know this: safety is not a place, it is a person who answers when you give them a name. And love, real love, is not rescue. It's what you build after the rescue, with lists, with tea, with the willingness to be seen when you're messiest. We began with a lie that protected us. We stayed because the truth turned out to be softer than we'd been taught to expect. If you are watching this on a screen in a room where the future feels like a closed door, put your hand on its wood. Feel the grain. Practice the word you want to use on the other side. It might not be husband. It might be freedom, or home, or your own name. When you say it like you expect an answer. Then open the door.